On a fantastic weekend, the Newton family were supposed to be on a camping trip, that would also be their family's first trip in the woods, at the remote Natani's Point campground, in Chain of Ponds, Maine, 6 miles from the Canadian border. But that picture-perfect morning would soon become their parents' worst nightmare. Did the 4-year-old boy wander so deep into the woods, on the day of his disappearance, that the search party never stood a chance? Why he disappeared into thin air, and left a mountain of questions, of the bizarre disappearance of 4-year-old boy, Kurt Newton. Let's get into it. Kurt Newton was born on July 28, 1971, in Manchester, Maine, to his parents Ron and Jill Newton. He grew up in a loving and supportive parents. At the time of his disappearance, he had an older sister named Kimberly, who was 6 years old. The two was very close to each other, was known to be a white blonde hair, and piercing blue eyes boy. Kurt was the kind of child that would do everything with huge aspirations. He was described by Kurt's family as a very shy and smart boy who didn't like being separated from her mother, even for a period of short time. He had no history of wandering away without permission, which means he wouldn't go somewhere alone for too long. His older sister, Kimberly, would often go into the woods behind their house with Kurt, but he quivered on the edge of the lawn with fear. Once his mother, Jill, asked him why he wouldn't go into the woods. "Mama, there's monsters in there," he answered. It was Labor Day weekend 1975, basically, it was their first trip, with the recently acquired second-hand tent trailer, what Jill called her luxury. They've drawn up a plan on camping, with a 4-household trip to the remote Natani's Point campground, in Chain of Ponds, Maine, 6 miles from the Canadian border, where they would enjoy a great time with themselves on this trip. Also around this time, the Newton family was hectically trying to get everything set up for hearty campers' breakfast: fried potatoes, ham and eggs, toast, and juice. Round 2 of coffee, just coming to a brew over the fire. And the day's sun was just starting to burn off the heavy mist that lay over the 2 nearby ponds. The camping ground temperature was ideal, not too cold, not too hot, but there was a lot of mud in the area over Labor Day weekend, where Kurt and his sister were playing around the campground. So his shoes got covered in mud, and then Jill, his mother, gathered the mud-soaked sneakers, just 50 yards from the family's campsite, to wash them. During playing around the campsite, Kurt apparently ran towards his big wheel tricycle, on a woods road about 4 miles, headed west away from the campground. A little boy trying to catch up with his father, and heard a loud yell from the distance, "Daddy, Daddy!" Meanwhile, Kurt's father, who had built that ordinary campfire in the morning, reportedly climbed into his Bronco, axe in hand, and drove off to get firewood to gather more. It was the end of summer, and there were huge meals, and laughter and quiet, chilly nights by a roaring fire. To Jill Newton, things felt just right, which was nothing out of the ordinary. But a thing was missing from there, and that little didn't they know that Kurt Newton had gone missing, without a trace. A 4-year-old boy managed to pedal his tricycle into the woods alone with no one else around him. By the time his father, Ron, returned back, Kurt had either been nowhere to be seen, or vanished from his loved ones' lives. Before anyone knew it, Kurt had slipped from everyone's sight, and was riding after his dad on his red big wheel tricycle. It's unclear why the Moor's father kept walking straight ahead. He didn't realize Kurt vanished without a trace from his backside. The shiny blonde-haired boy, who was afraid of the woods, was reported lost in the worst possible place, the woods. His family was completely horrified. His son was not used to going anywhere alone, or being by himself in public. He never had shown any signs of wanting to run away. They were desperately getting worried, so they called police to search for Kurt. As word traveled across Maine about Kurt's disappearance, the Newtons' friends and family jumped into action to join the search with police. Before long, there were more than 1,500 volunteers, searching the woods around chain of ponds, searching for 4-year-old Kurt Newton. Because the missing boy was only 4 at the time of his disappearance, temperatures in the area dropped below freezing. He couldn't have survived long, if he had been out in the elements without shelter. It was reported that over the course of the next 11 days, more than 3,000 people, including Maine's governor, joined the search to find Kurt. Shockingly and frustratingly, no clues were found to lead the searchers to Kurt. His parents worked alongside the police, following every lead, and just urging the police to provide any information that would help in the case. How could he have been strangely disappeared in a fast way in daytime? Was he kidnapped by a predator, who had been following him for a long time in the forest, and taking him off to somewhere? Also, there's been reports and statements that Kurt Newton was last seen by 11-year-old Lou Ellen Hansen, at about 10:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., riding his big wheel tricycle on a woods road, about 0.4 miles, headed west away from the campground. It was then theorized that Kurt could either have simply been abducted, or his tricycle broke down on him, on the way to go after his father, and would then reportedly get lost in the deep woods, never to be returned back. There was a grim report that a captive bear, often teased by local children, might have been released a few miles from the campground shortly before Kurt disappeared. A bear could have carried Kurt swiftly outside the area, but it was highly improbable that there would be a complete absence of signs. The police sent teletype descriptions of Kurt throughout the United States and Canada. Soon, Kurt Newton stared hauntingly from post office walls, in hundreds of cities. A call came from a man in Connecticut. He had returned from camping in the Canadian Rockies. There he had noticed a small blonde-haired boy, staring at him with a quizzical expression. He said he was struck by how nervous the boy and the man with him seemed with each other. He saw the same boy, he said fervently, on a Kurt Newton missing poster. That same week a call came from Vermont. 2 waitresses were sure they had seen Kurt in their restaurant. Detective Cook drove to Vermont and found that boy, but it wasn't the Kurt. However, it was clarified, that doesn't necessarily mean he was taken by someone he knows, as a stranger could have equally convinced him to go with them, without causing a struggle. A volunteer caretaker for the campground, Jack Hansen, found the tricycle just before the steep rise leading to the dump. But Kurt was nowhere to be found. A team of investigators interviewed everyone known to have been at the campground, using polygraphs when in doubt. One camper reported that she had seen a white station wagon roar out of the campground, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, shortly after the time Newton disappeared. But no such car was registered at the campground, and nobody else reported seeing it. And it has been nearly 45 years later, since Kurt Newton's disappearance. The theories have swirled, yet little has been uncovered to decipher what actually happened to Kurt, who vanished from the deep woods. And to this day, the case remains unsolved.